So you are thinking about buying your first down quilt. You might be a little nervous because they cost a lot of money and it can be very overwhelming. There's lots of jargon and acronyms to pick from, things like duck down, goose down, 10D, 20D, footboxes, overstuff, regular width, wide, baffle. Is baffle like a waffle? I could go for some waffles. Stay tuned because, as you can see, I have a lot of down quilts and I will walk you through the basics of buying a down quilt. First, what is the difference between a sleeping bag and a quilt? It's easy. A sleeping bag usually zips all the way up and only has a hole for your face. A quilt, on the other hand, is a little bit like a sleeping bag up to your knees. It has a footbox that's totally enclosed, and then the top 2/3 of the quilt is open on the back side. The thought is with a down quilt that if you're in a sleeping bag and you lay on that down, it compresses the down underneath your body. When down is compressed, it doesn't provide any insulation. So they're removing that portion of the sleeping bag to have nothing underneath you with a quilt. The thought is that hopefully that will be a little bit lighter and a little bit cheaper. Now, when you're sleeping on the ground with a quilt, you want to make sure that your sleeping pad is properly insulated for the temperatures that you're camping in. With most quilts, you can purchase inexpensive straps that loop around and secure your quilt to your sleeping pad. I highly recommend these if you're going to be sleeping on the ground. If you are a side sleeper or you shift around a lot in your sleep, I recommend that you get a wider quilt. The wider quilt will help reduce the chance of getting a gap on the side of you where the cold air can invade in between your sleeping pad and your quilt. Now, most quilts offer snaps on that top 2/3 of the quilt where it's open, where you can snap it together. Some offer some elastic where you can adjust the tension along the side of that quilt, and some even have a draft collar, so if you want to snap it up, there's that little extra down that goes around your neck. So if you're a ground sleeper and you're still worried about getting some gaps from rolling around and that cold air getting in, even with the snaps and the elastic and the other features, you may want to consider just getting a sleeping bag where you can zip up and there's no chance of that gap. Now, if you're a hammock sleeper, you do not want to get a wide version of the quilt, because in a hammock, you're most likely going to have an underquilt underneath the hammock or a pad keeping your underside warm, and you don't have to worry about those cold air gaps as much inside of the hammock. Fill power is a measurement of the loft or fluffiness of the down and its insulating power. The higher the fill power means that there are more air pockets within your down and a higher insulating value. Now, if you have more air pockets and less down giving you your insulation value, that means that your quilt will weigh less and you can compress it down smaller when you pack it in your backpack. But you've probably also noticed that the higher the fill power, the cost of the quilt goes up significantly. As you can see from this image from Enlightened Equipment, 850 fill power down will loft up to 850 cubic inches, and 950 fill power down will fill 950 cubic inches. Most of the high-powered down comes from geese, and the lower fill power down comes from ducks. Most of this down is sourced from Asia because the people in Asia eat more ducks and geese than we do here in the United States. You may want to check to see how your down is sourced, because believe it or not, some down is actually plucked off of live birds. Yes, it is as horrific as it sounds. If you look around on the websites of the places that you're considering purchasing your down quilt from, most of them will address if their down is ethically sourced. If you see the acronym RSD, that stands for Responsibly Sourced Down. Down quilts are one of the hardest items to do it yourself and try to make yourself. The first reason is down is super messy. The second reason is baffles. A good down quilt will not sew their quilting all the way through from the front to the back of the quilt, which is similar, you've probably seen on some COSCO down quilts. Sewing that seam all the way from the outside to the inside pulls the fabric all the way together, and there isn't that loft. And without that loft, you're going to have cold spots along that sewing. So the way that they overcome that is good quilts will put a baffle inside of the quilt. A baffle is a short piece of mesh that is put between the outside and the inside so you can maintain that loft all the way through your quilt. So the baffle height is directly correlated to the temperature rating of a quilt. As you can see from this table, a 1-inch baffle will give you a 50-degree Fahrenheit temperature rating. 2-inch will give you 30 degrees, a 3-inch baffle will give you 10 degrees, and a 4-inch baffle will give you a rating of minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to see terms like 10D, 20D, 30D. What's the D? D stands for denier, and denier is a unit of measurement of how thick the threads are to make the fabric. So if you have a quilt with a higher denier for the fabric on the outside, that fabric in your quilt is going to be heavier and it's going to be more durable. If it's a lower denier, your quilt is going to be lighter weight, but it's also going to be more fragile. Now, ripstop nylon has a grid pattern to it. And that grid pattern is in there to help stop tears and rips once they start. Taffeta is also a nylon fabric. However, it does not have that grid pattern of a ripstop. So if it does rip or get a tear, it's more likely that that rip or tear will grow. Now, taffeta is more abrasion resistant than a ripstop. And if you ever hear the term parachute nylon, it is usually a crinkle taffeta nylon. You're also going to hear the term DWR, which stands for durable water resistance. So if it's treated with that, it's not waterproof, but it's more likely to stay dry and to dry out quicker. Most quilt makers will offer you the option to overstuff or to add extra down inside of your quilt. Generally, doing so will not increase the warmth or the temperature rating of your quilt. As I mentioned earlier, the temperature rating of your quilt is determined by how long those baffles are, which makes your quilt thicker. By adding more down, it will not increase the size of those baffles. So the reason why they offer the option to overstuff your quilt is when you take your quilt out of your backpack, it's small and compressed, and you take it out and you're trying to fluff it up and trying to get it as thick as possible so it'll be as warm as possible. And the thought is by overstuffing your quilt, when you are taking it out, it'll get that maximum height, that maximum thickness quicker. The other thought is if you have your down quilt for a really long time, and I've never seen this to be a problem if you store your quilt properly, the thought is that some of that down will kind of wear out, and by having the extra down, you'll be able to maintain that temperature rating for a longer time. Most quilts offer a couple of different options for a footbox. You can have a zippered footbox or a sewn footbox. Now, I personally buy all of my quilts with a sewn-in footbox. A sewn-in footbox a lot of times costs a little bit more, but it's also a little bit lighter. Now, the benefit of having a zippered footbox is you can completely unzip that footbox and lay it out like a blanket, which a lot of people like to do when it's really warm out and it allows more venting. I personally, if it's warm out, I just kick a leg outside of that footbox so I can vent in that way. Now, the zippered footbox does have a couple of drawbacks other than weight. If you do have a zippered footbox, on the end of your quilt, it has a drawstring. And that drawstring on the end will leave a little hole. And that'll allow for a draft and some of the cold air to come in. So if you have a zippered footbox, you need to shove like a sock or a shirt in that hole in the end to prevent that cold air from drafting in. This is a hard one. Most quilt makers nowadays give their quilts a temperature rating rather than a survival rating. That is, they say that you should be comfortable sleeping in their quilt at the temperature rating that they're giving. And I've found that pretty accurate for everyone. But one of the things that you need to figure out is, are you a cold sleeper or a warm sleeper? I myself am a cold sleeper. So if a quilt says that it's rated to 20 degrees, I can usually only take that down to about 30 degrees. And a warm sleeper, a 20 degree quilt may get them down to 10 degrees. So you may be thinking, I go camping different times of the year. Here in Minnesota, I camp in temperatures that range from negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit up to 100 degrees. It's quite the variance. So you need to think about when are you camping most often? Is it early spring, late fall? And the temperatures at night usually get down to like 30 degrees or 10 degrees. You need to think about that. Here in Minnesota, a lot of people go camping most of the time in the spring and the fall, and I recommend for their first quilt that they get a 20 degree quilt. Now, another trick that you can do is if you are thinking about buying multiple quilts, maybe you're going to buy one now, and when you save up the money in 6 months, you're going to buy a second one. One of the things that you can think about is layering your quilts. You can see from this table that a 20 degree quilt inside of a 40 degree quilt should get you down to camping comfortably in negative 10 degrees. There are a lot of great companies out there selling quilts, anywhere from Enlightened Equipment to UGQ Outdoors to Warbonnet Outdoors to Hammock Gear to Local Libre to Jacks Are Better, and they go on and on. Now, I personally have purchased quilts from UGQ Outdoors, Warbonnet Outdoors, Hammock Gear, and Local Libre. The most popular probably seller of quilts is Enlightened Equipment. They are a premium down quilt. They are made in Winona, Minnesota. In fact, I used to live about a half a mile away from where they are manufactured, and they are a little bit higher priced being a premium quilt, but they are very, very nice. Also on that premium side is UGQ Outdoors Underground Quilts. They are also very, very nice. I've actually had a chance to go camping with Chad from UGQ, and you can tell that he puts a lot of effort into making sure that they have quality control and a very good product. They are manufactured in Michigan, and UGQ actually automatically overstuffs all of their quilts to 130% of what is necessary to achieve that loft. Some other quilts are Warbonnet Outdoors. They are manufactured in Colorado, also very nice, and Local Libre, which is manufactured in New Jersey. Both Warbonnet Outdoors and Local Libre are the only companies that I know of that specifically manufacture underquilts for bridge hammocks. So what would I recommend that you buy for your quilt? I would recommend, if you have the resources, that you buy one of those premium quilts from either UGQ Outdoors or Enlightened Equipment. Now, if you're more on a budget, I would recommend that you buy a quilt from Hammock Gear. Now, even though their name is Hammock Gear, you do not have to sleep in a hammock to use their gear. Their top quilt is the same as a quilt from all the rest of the manufacturers. And they have a premium line and they have an economy line. And you can see here on their website that their economy line, their top quilt, which is called a Burrow, is a little bit heavier in that it has an 800 fill power down, but their prices are significantly lower. A 20 degree starts at just $190, and they are slightly more if you have a sewn-in footbox or you get that wide version for sleeping on the ground. They are quality and they are a durable quilt. A little pro tip here. If you want to save significantly and you have the time, wait until Black Friday to order your quilt. Most of these websites will have a significant sale on Black Friday. This past Black Friday, Hammock Gear offered 20% off of their quilts. I ordered a couple new quilts, and not only did I get that 20% off, but I had a discount code of Midwest 10, which you can use too. Again, that's Midwest 10. And not only will you get the 20% off, but you can get an additional 10% off. So the two quilts that I purchased were 30% off on Black Friday. If you have any questions about purchasing a down quilt that I didn't cover in this video, go ahead and ask those in the comments down below. Also, do me a favor, if you like this video, hit subscribe, punch that bell notification, check me out on Instagram, check me out on Facebook. I have merch available in Teespring. Thank you for watching, and I will see you out on the trail.